Welcome to Crime Story. Today, I bring you a story that is both chilling and haunting, one that has touched the hearts of many and sparked conversations across the world. It's the tragic tale of Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old woman whose life was cut short in an incident that shook the very foundation of the justice system. On March 13, 2020, Breonna's home was raided by police officers in a case that would soon raise questions about police practices, accountability, and racial injustice. This is a story that has had lasting effects on Breonna's family, the community, and the entire nation, as it brought to light issues that go beyond just one incident. If you find this story compelling, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel, so we can continue bringing you more gripping crime stories and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Now, let's dive into the story. On the night of March 13, 2020, a tragedy unfolded behind the closed doors of an apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old African-American medical worker, was fatally shot in her own home by police officers from the Louisville Metro Police Department, LMPD. At the time, Breonna was just starting to make her mark in the world. She had dreams, plans, and a life ahead of her. But in a matter of seconds, her future was stolen away, and her death would ignite one of the most significant debates in the United States about police brutality, racial injustice, and the value of human life. Breonna's death did not just leave a hole in the hearts of her family and friends, it reverberated across the nation. The night that should have been ordinary quickly turned into a nightmare when officers, executing a no-knock warrant, barged into Breonna's apartment. Confusion, fear, and chaos followed. Breonna's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, thinking they were intruders, fired a single warning shot. In response, the officers unleashed a barrage of gunfire, 32 shots in total, striking Breonna multiple times. She was killed in the hallway of her own home. The events of that night, and the lack of accountability in its aftermath, would spark protests and rally cries for justice, from the streets of Louisville to cities across the globe. Breonna Taylor's story goes beyond the headlines and the anger that followed her death. It's a story that speaks to the deeper issues within law enforcement, the challenges of systemic racism, and the struggle for justice. It forces us to question how much we truly know about the institutions meant to protect us and whether they can ever be fully trusted. But Breonna Taylor is not just a name in a news story, she is a symbol of all the voices calling for change. Today, we'll take a deep dive into her story, not just to remember the life she lost, but to uncover the powerful lessons we must all learn if we are ever to truly change. This isn't just about what happened to Breonna, it's about the lessons we all need to face. Breonna Taylor was a young woman with a promising future, living in Louisville, Kentucky. At just 26 years old, she had already made a name for herself in the medical field, working as an emergency room technician at the University of Louisville Health. It's not every day you encounter someone so dedicated to helping others, but Breonna was one of those rare people who devoted her life to saving others, treating patients in distress, offering comfort in the most trying of moments. To those who knew her, she wasn't just a colleague, she was someone who genuinely cared about making the world a better place. But on March 13, 2020, Breonna's life took a horrific and unexpected turn. Her name, which had once been associated with kindness and compassion, became tied to a tragic event that would make headlines across the world. That fateful night, Breonna's home was raided by the Louisville Metro Police Department, LMPD. The officers were executing a no-knock warrant, investigating a drug operation. However, the target of the warrant was not Breonna herself but a man named Jamarcus Glover, someone with whom she had no direct involvement for months. In fact, she had long since cut ties with him. Yet, the officers mistakenly connected her name to his in their investigation, and Breonna's apartment was marked as the place to search. Imagine the confusion that must have filled her apartment that night. Breonna and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, were fast asleep, unaware of the danger that was about to invade their peaceful night. The police officers, in plain clothes, approached Breonna's door, but neither of them identified themselves before they violently broke the door down. To Breonna and Kenneth, they weren't seeing police officers, they were seeing intruders. That's when Kenneth, terrified and confused, fired a warning shot. He had no way of knowing that the people breaking into their home were police officers. What followed was a tragedy that no one could have anticipated. A barrage of gunfire rang out, with the officers firing 32 rounds in response to the shot they had received. Was there true justice in their actions that night? That question is still unanswered, and the events that followed would not only alter the lives of Breonna's family forever but would also spark a nationwide conversation about the failures of law enforcement and the justice system. Breonna Taylor's story became one that was heard not just by those in Louisville but by millions around the world, who watched in horror as her death became the latest example of systemic issues within police practices. It was supposed to be just another night in Breonna Taylor's life, a night filled with routine, quiet, and peace. But that peace was shattered in an instant. Around midnight on March 13, 2020, Breonna and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, were at home in their apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, unaware of the catastrophic events that were about to unfold. As they lay in bed, a loud, violent bang at the door pierced the silence. The sound of the door being rammed down echoed through their apartment. In the haze of confusion, neither Breonna nor Kenneth had any idea who was at the door. They hadn't heard any announcement or warning, nothing to suggest that it was the police. They had no reason to believe that their home was being raided by officers from the Louisville Metro Police Department, LMPD. For them, it was simply a terrifying intrusion and attack on their sanctuary, their private space. Kenneth, shaken and fearing for their safety, reacted the only way he could think of. He fired a single shot, a warning, aimed at what he believed were intruders breaking into their home. In that moment, his instinct to protect himself and Breonna took over. But what happened next was far from what anyone could have anticipated. The police, who had been preparing to execute a no-knock warrant, returned fire. But not just a few shots, no, they fired a full barrage. 32 rounds were discharged into the apartment. The sound of gunfire filled the air, and the chaos in those few moments was unlike anything either of them could have imagined. The officers' actions were swift, relentless, and indiscriminate. Breonna, tragically, became the victim of that violence. She was struck by multiple bullets, and in those seconds of confusion, terror, and panic, her life was taken. Breonna Taylor, just 26 years old, was dead. The same young woman who had worked tirelessly as an emergency room technician, saving lives, was now lying lifeless on the floor of her own apartment. The cruelty and speed with which her life was extinguished was not just a loss for her family but a stark, tragic reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control when systems designed to protect fail. Kenneth, still in shock, didn't even realize the magnitude of what had just occurred. He was left alone, trying to make sense of the nightmare he had just witnessed. The chaos didn't end with Breonna's death. Kenneth was arrested immediately after the shooting, and the story spun into a whirlwind of confusion and misinformation. The police officers involved who had come to Breonna's apartment searching for drugs they believed might be there left the scene with no drugs, no evidence, and no answers. In the days that followed, the incident spiraled into an overwhelming storm of public outrage. Was there any justification for the police's actions that night? Could the situation have been avoided? Breonna Taylor's family would soon learn that their fight for justice was just beginning. As the city of Louisville reeled from the aftermath, the pain and grief of a family who had lost a beloved daughter and friend began to echo far beyond their home. The tragedy of what happened to Breonna would become a rallying cry for justice, one that would be heard across the nation, from the streets of Louisville to the halls of government, as people demanded answers, accountability, and change. Her death marked a tragic turning point in the ongoing conversation about police brutality, the abuse of power, and the racial injustice that pervades many aspects of American society. As the days passed after Breonna Taylor's tragic death, a cloud of confusion hung over the incident, leaving more questions than answers. Why did the police act the way they did that night? Was there a true justification for their actions, or was this a catastrophic misstep? The more people dug into the details of the case, the murkier things became. The officers who raided Breonna's apartment claimed they had announced themselves before forcibly entering the home. They insisted that they had shouted "police" before breaking down the door, following standard procedure for a no-knock warrant. But as the investigation unfolded, the contradictions began to emerge. Witness after witness, including several of Breonna's neighbors, came forward to share their accounts of the night. They painted a picture that didn't match the police narrative. Some neighbors said they heard nothing at all, no announcement, no warning. The only sound that pierced the silence was the deafening crash of the door being kicked down. It wasn't until the investigation delved deeper that the inconsistencies began to pile up. One neighbor, who was just above Breonna's apartment, reported hearing a single shout of "police." But this witness's story was also questioned. The lawyer for this neighbor later suggested that the initial statement might have been misquoted or taken out of context, leaving even more doubt in the minds of those following the case. If the officers did indeed announce themselves, why didn't anyone else hear it? Could it be that they failed to properly identify themselves before executing the raid? These are the kinds of questions that people couldn't let go of. If the police had done their job right, if they had properly announced their presence, would the chain of events have been different? Would Breonna still be alive today? Or was her death simply a result of a tragic mistake, one that could have been avoided if the officers had followed protocol? The fact that there was so much conflicting testimony left the public questioning the very foundation of the police actions that night. But perhaps the most chilling question of all is whether Breonna's death was the result of sheer negligence. The police had a warrant to search her home, but it was based on faulty information. There was no evidence linking Breonna to any criminal activity, yet her name was dragged into an investigation that had nothing to do with her. Why was Breonna's apartment, a place where she worked hard to make a living and build a future, targeted in the first place? How could such a careless mistake lead to a young woman's death? As more details about the case came to light, the public demanded answers. But those answers never seemed to come. The grand jury's decision not to indict any officers on charges related to Breonna's death only deepened the sense of injustice and the feeling that the police had been given a free pass. Was this a case of genuine misfortune, or was there something darker at play? Was it possible that the officers were covering up their failures, or were they simply never held accountable for their actions? These are questions that continue to haunt Breonna's family, the people of Louisville, and the millions who followed her story. The truth remains elusive, and the answers continue to slip through the cracks, leaving a painful void in the pursuit of justice. The killing of Breonna Taylor set off a firestorm of outrage that rippled across the United States, igniting protests and fueling an ongoing conversation about police brutality and systemic racism. Her death was not just a local tragedy but a moment that demanded national attention. The hashtag Say Her Name became a powerful symbol, calling for justice and reminding the world that Breonna's life mattered. The movement highlighted the urgency of addressing the root causes of racial injustice in law enforcement and the need for real reform. But as protests spread, the responses from those in power seemed woefully inadequate. Despite the overwhelming outcry from citizens, activists, and even some public figures, no charges were initially filed against the officers involved in Breonna's death. The lack of accountability sent shockwaves through communities, particularly among African Americans, who had already experienced a history of unfair treatment and police violence. The anger was palpable. How could a young woman, who was asleep in her own home, be killed in such a brutal way, yet the officers responsible faced no consequences? This glaring lack of justice raised serious questions about the integrity of the very system that was meant to protect the people. As the investigation proceeded, many felt that the police had received preferential treatment, while Breonna's family and the public were left with nothing but questions and frustration. Why were the officers not held accountable? Why wasn't there more urgency in pursuing justice for Breonna? The public outrage grew louder, leading to more protests, more calls for reform, and more scrutiny of law enforcement practices across the country. People took to the streets, demanding answers, and the calls for justice could be heard from coast to coast. The absence of charges also led to a deeper reflection on the role of the justice system. What does it say about a system that fails to hold those in positions of power accountable, especially when it comes to cases of police violence against people of color? Was this a failure of the system itself, or was it a reflection of a much deeper issue with how law enforcement interacts with marginalized communities? The fact that no officers were indicted seemed to suggest that the system was designed to protect those in power, even at the expense of innocent lives. This raised difficult questions about the integrity of law enforcement and the need for meaningful change. As the protests continued, Breonna's name became synonymous with a larger movement calling for justice. #Say Her Name echoed through social media, rallies, and demonstrations, urging the world not to forget her story. But as the outcry intensified, so too did the frustration of those who saw Breonna's death as just another tragic reminder of the systemic racism embedded in American society. With each day that passed without charges, the gap between the people and the institutions meant to protect them seemed to widen. The fight for justice for Breonna Taylor wasn't just about one woman, it was about the need for sweeping reforms that could ensure such tragedies would never happen again. Breonna Taylor's case highlighted the need for fundamental changes within the justice system, and it became a turning point in the larger fight for racial equality in America. Her death may have been a moment of profound loss, but the response that followed showed the resilience of a people determined to see justice, not just for Breonna, but for all those who have been affected by police violence and racial injustice. While the lack of criminal charges against the officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death left many feeling that justice had been denied, her case did spark significant legal and social changes. In the face of public outrage and demands for accountability, the city of Louisville made an unprecedented decision. In September 2020, they agreed to pay Breonna's family a historic $12 million settlement, the largest ever in a wrongful death case involving the Louisville Metro Police Department. Along with the monetary settlement, the city promised to implement changes to police practices, including a ban on the controversial no-knock warrants that had played a central role in Breonna's death. But the question remains, is this enough? Is financial compensation and a change in policy enough to prevent such tragedies from happening again? The settlement, though groundbreaking, felt like a small victory in a much larger battle. No amount of money could bring Breonna back, and no policy change could erase the pain and grief her family was left to carry. More importantly, it raised the crucial question, what happens next? Can we ensure that Breonna's death wasn't in vain? Can we create lasting change that prevents more innocent lives from being taken? The answer isn't easy. The reforms in Louisville were a step in the right direction, but they are only a small piece of the puzzle. Breonna's case is a stark reminder that there are deep-seated issues within the system, issues that go far beyond one tragedy or one city. It's about addressing systemic racism, rethinking police practices, and demanding more accountability from those in power. It's about ensuring that the institutions meant to protect the people are truly held accountable when they fail. Breonna Taylor's story ignited a national conversation, one that continues today. It sparked widespread calls for police reform, more oversight, and a re-evaluation of the justice system as a whole. But the true measure of change will be seen in the years to come, in the laws that are passed, the policies that are reformed, and the society that is shaped by the actions we take today. The movement sparked by Breonna's death is far from over. It's just one chapter in a long fight for justice and equality, but it is a chapter that we must carry forward with conviction and commitment. Breonna Taylor's name is no longer just a name. It has become a symbol, one of resilience, a symbol in the fight for justice and equality. Her death may have been a moment of profound loss, but her life and legacy continue to resonate in the hearts of millions. Breonna's story reminds us that every voice matters, that every person deserves to be heard, and that justice cannot simply exist on paper. We must make it real, and we must make it count. Her memory is a call to action, a call to continue working for change, to push for reforms, and to fight for a world where every person, regardless of their race, can live safely and equally. Let us honor Breonna Taylor by committing ourselves to the fight for a better future, where no one else has to face the same fate, and where justice is not a privilege, but a right for all. Breonna's name will not be forgotten, and neither should the lessons we've learned from her story. The fight for justice continues, and it's one we must all be a part of. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the tragic and thought-provoking story of Breonna Taylor. Her death has sparked a global conversation about justice, police reform, and the fight for equality. While her story is heartbreaking, it has also given us the opportunity to reflect on the changes needed to create a fairer and safer world for all. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more crime stories and in-depth explorations of real-life cases. Your support helps us keep telling these important stories and continue our work in shedding light on issues that matter. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and keep questioning the world around you. Thank you for watching Crime Story.